John Cleland, thanks for joining us and welcome to this discussion on what's happening with distribution in Australia.
Jarrod, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
I thought we'd start off with a little bit about Essential Energy, and if you could just take us through a bit about the organisation.
Being who we are places us in a unique position in terms of the energy transition, in that we cover a massive network footprint, we have a low customer density, and we have extraordinary prospectivity for renewable generation across our network. And so the network covers regional, rural and remote New South Wales. It extends across 737,000 square kilometres, making it one of the largest distribution networks on the planet. We have just on 900,000 connected customers, about 1.4 million power poles, and some 189,000 kilometres of overhead line. And importantly, within that, we have about 10,000 kilometres of 66 and 132 kilovolt line, which we refer to as our sub-transmission network. And that has massive prospectivity for the hosting of renewable generation, which is not exactly what we're discussing today, but it's a very important element of the business.
Essential is going through a bit of a transformation, maybe not just a bit, but a large transformation at the moment with some rebranding. Could you take us through what's inspired that and what's driving that?
The energy sector is going through a massive transformation globally, and Essential Energy is no exception in that. The energy transition is proving very difficult for all jurisdictions globally, and Australia's no different. Essential Energy views the energy transition as an enormously positive trend for regional, rural and remote New South Wales, and particularly the economy of regional, rural and remote New South Wales. And so we are, as an organisation, very focused on leveraging the opportunities that flow from the energy transition. And as a consequence, we are continually evolving our structure, our focus, our strategy to ensure those opportunities are realised to the greatest extent. And the opportunities for regional, rural and remote New South Wales really go to the fact that we have a low customer density, significant opportunity to host utility scale and consumer energy resource or household generation. So we've got significant generation, renewable generation across the network today. There is the opportunity for the co-location of generation and load, allowing regional communities to avail themselves of a much higher proportion of locally generated energy, decarbonised energy, and ultimately highly reliable and lower cost energy. So to achieve that, we as an organisation need to continue to evolve, and that goes to a whole raft of areas of focus, but particularly to digitisation and ensuring that the network is genuinely availing itself of the opportunities to digitise. We see an inevitable trend towards digitisation across the energy sector. It's probably the most profound change that will impact on the sector over the next few years and through the energy transition, probably more so than decarbonisation and decentralisation. It'll be digitisation that has the greatest impact. And so Essential Energy has been an early adopter of digital initiatives, including the rollout back in 2016 of iDevices, so iPhones and iPads to all employees. And off the back of that, we saw an explosion of innovation within the business, and innovation that was very much from the business for the business, and much of it led from the front line of the business. In particular, the development of our field portal, which in simple terms started from overlaying our network maps on Google Maps and allowing us to evolve from very much a paper-based business to one that is now almost entirely operating at the front line on glass rather than using old paper maps. And that's given rise to extraordinary efficiencies. We were early adopters of drones, and we now have any number of thousands of drones deployed across the business. All of our asset inspectors use drones on a regular basis. We're increasingly using more sophisticated drones, so beyond line of sight drones, to record network information, to capture LiDAR data, and that's giving rise to really significant efficiencies in the business. The other area of focus for us is ensuring that our customer base have the opportunity to genuinely benefit from the energy transition. And that goes to the decarbonisation of the generation mix, the decarbonisation of households, and most importantly, the decarbonisation of commercial and industrial customers.
And indeed, and that's where A2EP's focus is on those commercial and industrial customers. And look, it's fabulous to hear about that innovation, because that innovation turns into efficiency, which turns into productivity, helps cost of living, helps our incomes and what have you. So wonderful to hear. On that C&I space and for electrification, we've been working with your teams and supporting them with what we know of the technology that's coming for electrification, and it's been a fabulous working relationship with your teams in this area. So we're really seeing you guys lean in to electrification, which is fabulous. And we look at some of the other distributors, they're doing bits and pieces, but no one seems to be doing as much and moving as quickly as Essential Energy there. What's driving you there for this electrification push?
Every distribution network is looking at all of these challenges and opportunities. And I think every distribution network is leading the field in one way or another. We have a fundamental belief that there will be really significant benefits flowing for commercial and industrial customers, regional economies and regional communities from decarbonisation. And that really goes to a few different elements. If I can just sort of step back for a moment and just make the observation that even in the current environment, there is a very significant amount of wasted or underutilised generation. And so there's economic curtailment of utility scale generation. There's households that are increasingly being encouraged to curtail their exports in the middle of the day. And we've all read about different tariffs that are coming in, which will disincentivise the export of electrons from homes in the middle of the day. And that's because we are seeing, what we are seeing increasingly is surplus generation in the middle of the day, which is giving rise to negative wholesale prices. And that's a challenge from a network perspective. It's a challenge that will be addressed and overcome predominantly through the implementation of large amounts of storage across the network. But it's also a massive opportunity. And it's a massive opportunity in as much that there is negatively priced or very low priced electrons available much of the time. And if those negatively priced or low priced electrons can be combined with thermal batteries, other forms of storage, and become a substitute for existing fossil-based generation and heat within commercial and industrial businesses, that provides a really significant benefit. There's the clear benefit of decarbonisation. That gives rise to a better outcome for the environment and the planet. It gives rise to a far greater level of autonomy and reliability in terms of fuel source. We all know and read about Australia's reliability on imported fossil fuels, particularly petroleum products, and the very short window we have there in terms of availability and reliability. And it also, probably most importantly, gives rise to the opportunity for the co-location of generation and load. And by the co-location, I mean the co-location of generation and load within regional economies and regional communities. And I referenced that earlier. That will become an increasingly important element of the energy transition, and an increasingly important role that distribution networks will play in actually facilitating that co-location and the development of regional communities that are much more self-reliant in terms of their energy generation and consumption.
And you mentioned regional, supporting this region, supporting resilience and reliability for the grid there. I do see that you're out there very proactive with consultation and with your customers. Maybe you could just run us through a little bit of some of those processes that you.
So we have an active program of getting out and talking to regional communities, talking to commercial and industrial customers. We're undertaking roadshows. We're participating in conferences, we're participating and supporting organisations such as yours. We see that as incredibly important to increase the level of education and understanding amongst our customers. A lot of this transition and the available technologies are embryonic, they're emerging, they're at times complex. we're all on a learning curve. We're definitely all on a learning curve here, and we just really wish or want to be part of that learning process and ensure we're doing absolutely everything we can to bring the best technologies to commercial and industrial customers across our network footprint.
With all this electrification that's going to come, how do we ensure that this is an economical transition and we're not just over-investing and spending too much? How do we get this right?
There is the risk of over-investment. There's the risk of over-investment in transmission infrastructure. There's the risk of over-investment in generation. There's the risk of over-investment in other areas, and we need to ensure that doesn't occur. We need to ensure that we get the most efficient outcomes, and that will really flow from having the best and most efficient pricing signals, both in terms of the cost of electrons and the cost of network access, and that goes to tariffs and sort of the revenue model that an organisation like ours uses. Tariffs are an inordinately complex field that require very careful consideration on the part of networks, retailers, regulators and rule makers to evolve from where we are today. So it's clear that to a large extent, demand charges and time of use tariffs are not going to be wholly efficient in terms of industrial decarbonisation. And we need to move to a much more dynamic set of tariffs that reflect network conditions and market conditions and provide the best price signal possible and allow industrial customers to utilise the available energy, and particularly that I referenced earlier that's low priced or negatively priced, in an optimal way to ensure that the benefits are maximised.
Now we're hearing more about this idea of a dynamic tariff and how that could interact with technologies that are already on site that when we use to decarbonise heat, whether that's a thermal battery or a lithium-ion battery. Yep. And what have you. Could you just expand a little bit more on how a dynamic tariff would work? Who has the control of this, and how is all these sort of tariffs going to translate into better energy costs?
Maybe the best way to explain this is to talk about an energy consumer that can opportunistically consume energy. So if you've got an industrial process that doesn't need to run 24/7, it can run at certain times of the day, then it should have the opportunity to avail itself of very low cost energy for all of its production processes because it can turn on and turn off. In the situation of a customer that requires a more continuous supply of energy, then the dynamic pricing becomes really important because they get a real-time price signal as to where the market's at and where the network's at, and can actually respond to that in real time. And so if there is the requirement for a fixed price or a fixed cost supply, that needs to build in all the contingencies around the availability of electrons and the availability of network capacity. A dynamic tariff or a dynamic pricing structure allows for much lower pricing with the trade-off of different levels of availability at different times.
And this sounds exactly what the market needs. And there's this transition going on from standard gas-fired boilers and burners to more electrically driven heating systems. And we really encourage people to be thinking, how is that going to be flexible? What's your 6 to 8 strategy when there's an evening peak? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for reduced availability, say through winter of renewable electricity and what have you? How are you guys thinking about this as well as being able to feed into that and help that?
So it's a combination of having the right pricing and tariff structures and ensuring that industrial and commercial users have the right configuration on their own side of the equation. And so that goes to the scoping of the industrial process, the scoping of machines or factories or processing plants. It goes to scoping the size of lithium-ion and thermal batteries, and actually accurately determining what the size of that battery should be to ensure that the organisation or the customer can operate through periods of high pricing or low availability and actually sustain. The other point I think is really key here is that in terms of education and information, we're dealing with point in time decisions here as existing plant and existing generation within commercial and industrial businesses comes up for renewal. There's a long lifespan or long life period for each of these assets. And so an industrial business in regional New South Wales that is using gas, oil or diesel today, if they replace that machine today on a like-for-like basis, it's a 20 to 30 year lifetime. And that's why so much of this information, communication, market intelligence is so important, because it is easy for organisations to replace on a like-for-like basis. And exactly the same applies to residential households. You know, gas hot water systems, gas cooktops, gas heaters that are replaced today, those customers are going to be very reticent to actually turf them out in 3 years' time when they realise that heat pumps and induction cooktops are a more efficient outcome.
It's funny how you draw that the correlation there between residential and industrial, because a residential, if they rush to make that change for their gas heater, it's going to be like for like. Very much the same in industrial. If they get caught out and have to make a quick decision, it's going to be like for like. It's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be the proper electrified solution. And I know you and the team at Essential are getting out there into the field and trying to help customers and get them ready for that transition. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what's going on there with that direct electrification support.
At the outset, let me say, Essential Energy has undertaken a detailed process of fossil fuel mapping across its network in recent times to understand exactly what the likely opportunity for decarbonisation is. And to put that in context, the Essential Energy network has a peak load of about 2.4 gigawatts. And that peak load used to be a summer evening. It's evolved more into a winter morning now, interestingly, because of rooftop solar. Across, in terms of the fossil fuel mapping we've done, we've identified the opportunity to supply a further 4.4 gigawatts of load through the decarbonisation of existing industrial processes that are serviced by fossil options. And so that's a 4.4 gigawatt substitution opportunity on top of an existing 2.4 gigawatt peak load on the network. And that's extraordinary in terms of the opportunity it represents, and particularly the opportunity it represents to host more utility scale generation on the network and to more efficiently utilise existing rooftop solar. To avail ourselves of that, we need the right pricing structures, the right tariff structures, and we need lived examples and use cases. So we're working with a significant organisation in the food and beverage sector at the moment, working on a real life decarbonisation initiative, which will see them move away from a fossil option into an electrified option, utilising thermal batteries, and that will be a really, really important initiative in terms of demonstrating the benefits and using those demonstrated benefits to communicate with others through the road shows and the information I've been referring to.
With all this extra electrification coming on, can we drive utilisation higher and hopefully therefore impacting household bills as well and putting some downward pressure on household bills?
Absolutely, and that's a key benefit of electrification for household bills and for industrial users. Essential Energy is regulated by the Australian Energy Regulator. We obtain a 5-year revenue determination, which allows us to recover our costs and generate a return of and return on our regulated asset base. That actually derives a revenue cap, so that the Australian Energy Regulator determines the amount of revenue we can recover over a 5-year period. To recover that revenue, we need to ascribe a value to each electron consumed. Therefore, as more electrons are consumed across the network, and particularly electrons that are consumed without the requirement for network augmentation, overall, the cost of each electron consumed is lower. And that has a particular benefit for households and a sort of a combined or cumulative benefit for industrial and commercial users. And that is a key element of decarbonisation and electrification across the network.
I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. Could we get to 60+% utilisation? How far can we go here?
It's a very good question, and it really goes to the level of reliability and redundancy required in the grid. So we have an N-1 licence condition, which means we have to have sufficient latent capacity or underutilised capacity in the network to ensure that we meet that requirement. That said, we can go much higher, and particularly through the co-location of generation and load. If much of the generation and load are close to each other, then the actual overall utilisation of the network remains relatively constant, but the economic activity that the network actually supports becomes much greater, and the sort of per unit or net cost of using the network falls.
On network utilisation, why is it so important?
Network utilisation is important because we operate under a revenue cap model. The Australian Energy Regulator determines a revenue allowance over a 5-year period for businesses like, or regulated networks like Essential Energy. That revenue cap needs to be recovered across all the energy that's consumed on the network. As more energy is consumed, more electrons are consumed across the network, the cost per electron actually declines and the cost per customer declines. And that has particular benefits for households and cumulative benefits for industrial and commercial users. So there is a particular benefit that flows from electrifying existing industrial and commercial energy consumption, which is currently supplied through fossil means. And to put that in context, the Essential Energy Network has a peak load of about 2.4 gigawatts. Through fossil fuel mapping across our network, we've identified the opportunity to supply an additional 4.4 gigawatts to replace existing industrial processes that are fueled by diesel, gas, oil, coal, as the case may be. And that is an extraordinary opportunity, and the opportunity to meaningfully reduce prices across our network, and in so doing, facilitate further economic activity across regional, rural and remote New South Wales and across the Essential Energy Network footprint.
And because if we look at the utilisation across the NEM, been sliding for the last 10 or 15 years from high 50s down to the low 40s. Yep. This industrial electrification, commercial electrification, residential, it sounds like if we do this right, this could really start turning around that utilisation and put some good downward pressure on delivered electricity prices.
That's absolutely right. It will do exactly that. And the reduction in utilisation across the NEM over the last 15 years, there's a few factors that have contributed to that. An important element is the investment in networks up until about 2014-15 to meet N-1 licence conditions. And whilst there has been some criticism of that investment is now, we're reaping the rewards of that investment now, because networks, and particularly the Essential Network, is in a state where we can actually provide the opportunity to see a lot more generation on the network and a lot more consumption, a lot more load on the network, which, as you say, has particular economic benefits, and particularly in terms of lower prices for customers.
It's so good to see you guys leaning in. You really are leaning into this transition. And I thought, well, let's close off. And what do you see with the future of energy, electricity markets in Australia?
It's a great question, and so many of us in the industry spend so much time ruminating on exactly that. When I think about the future, I envisage a future, particularly within the Essential Energy Network footprint, that will be far, far more digitised. And that means that all customers and the network will be far, far more efficient in the way we generate, consume, store, trade electrons. And that will be really important. I envisage a future where we have achieved a significant amount of decarbonisation, and that will bring with it significant benefits through electrification in terms of much greater energy security, much more locally generated and consumed energy that is decarbonised or green and at lower cost. I also envisage a future where electrification has genuinely given rise to economic growth and economic opportunity across regional, rural, remote New South Wales, and for that matter, all of regional Australia. There are huge opportunities to bring industrial processes into regional Australia and into Australia more generally from overseas as a consequence of our wonderful endowment of wind and solar, our ability to generate, store, and utilise those electrons on an efficient basis, and particularly, as I say, where there's a regional element to it and a co-location which gives rise to such massive economic benefits.
John Cleland, thanks you so much for joining us today. You've given us a lot of confidence that everything's falling into place for electrification to give us a really bright future here in
Jarrod,
Australia.
thank you. Great talking to you. Much appreciated.